Hello, I'm Dr. John Kruse, and today I'm going to be talking about ADHD and distractibility in car crashes. So I'm going to start with the take-home message. And the take-home is that yes, ADHD is associated with more car accidents. More car accidents include death, and although ADHD could contribute in any number of ways through impulsivity, through poor sustained attention, through not responding to cues, the biggest factor that came out by far in the recent study, it's actually 2 years ago, was distractibility, and more precisely poor endogenous control of orienting, which means not being able to take a top-down, consistent choosing what to focus on and think and keep in your conscious awareness. So, jumping into it, we have why look at car crashes and ADHD. One is that there's a lot of data on it. The government keeps track of car accidents extensively, and some of that can be cross-referenced with information on medication, on ADHD status, so we have a fair amount of data there. And two, there's serious mortality associated with it. For decades, we killed car accidents were a major source of accident death. It's only in the last decade or so that we've been successful, rah rah, go America, in killing more people with guns than with cars, and that's taken over substantially. But car crashes still are killing 30,000 plus people a year, so this is a serious problem. And in terms of ADHD and driving, so one other third reason: one, there's lots of data. Two, this is a serious problem. Three, there may be useful carryovers or extrapolations from studies looking at driving and ADHD to other areas where ADHD is either increasing mortality or causing other morbidity or problems in life. So, excuse me. What's the data on ADHD and driving? So, just looking at driving, people with ADHD get substantially more traffic tickets, and substantially, this is a crude overestimation or crude summary of many different studies, but I'd say almost everything I'm saying, people with ADHD have about twice the rate as non-ADHD population. So the other thing I'll say is that with these various factors, whether you look at ADHD as categorical and decide these people have it compared to those who don't, or whether you're looking at it as a continuous variable in terms of the degree of ADHD-ness, these factors are true with driving. So, one, more traffic tickets. Two, more car crashes, motor vehicle accidents. Three, substantially more fatal and severe, where death or serious permanent injury result from it, are associated with ADHD. Again, about twofold difference. Four, more of the higher percentage of the motor vehicle accidents involving people with ADHD are attributed to the driver error on the part of the person with ADHD than at the general rate. And five, in terms of more, the number of accidents and tickets and other traffic problems for most Americans decreases substantially with age. So you get more experience, you become a better driver, and that decrease with age is not nearly as prominent with ADHD. So the drivers are, as it were, not learning from their past mistakes. So that's moving on from the general traffic driving information. Using virtual driving modules where you can study what's going on and examine, how the person's failing or succeeding on these in-laboratory driving tasks. People with ADHD have been measurably less good at maintaining stable control over their vehicle. They execute more abrupt accelerations and deaccelerations, so slamming on the gas, slamming on the brakes are more common if you have ADHD. Again, these are from virtual lab situations, virtual driving. Three, more frequent lane changing, so swerving in and out, and 4, more speeding, all of which statistically are clearly associated with greater risk of accidents. When switching back to sort of the real world and observing what's going on within the car of people, so measures of inattention are higher among the ADHD drivers than among non-drivers. The degree to which the driver is distracted by in-vehicle distractors, cues, things that should not be cues. So putting in, this is going to date me, the tape, just fiddling with the radio or the buttons, looking at your on-screen control instead of paying attention to what you're driving, trying to put on makeup, trying to eat, all those things, all those distractors. People with ADHD are measurably more attention taken away from their task at driving and what's going on within the car. 3, poorer monitoring of road conditions. So less, again, monitoring what's going on outside the car that's relevant to driving and driving conditions. And one variable that the assumption would be consistently worse in ADHD would be greater impulsivity, greater or poorer inhibition of impulses that aren't helpful or useful in a situation. And the data there is actually mixed, some finding greater impulsivity in the driving of people with ADHD and others not discerning any difference between non-ADHD drivers and drivers. So all of this fairly large pool of data about ADHD and driving creates sort of 4 likely targets or hypotheses of where the major problem is. And again, these are not necessarily mutually exclusive. It could be that all 4 of these topics or areas of executive function deficits are responsible for car accidents. And this is, I'm oversimplifying a little bit, but 4 general categories have been suspected and looked at and examined. So one is just vigilance or sustained attention. If you're not maintaining, if your attention lags when you're driving, then you're going to be surprised by things that are going on. Interestingly, sustained attention itself, or trouble sustaining it, even though that is one of the 18 criteria and one of the 9 inattentive criteria that's in DSM for ADHD, and clinically I can attest to people with ADHD subscribing to that, trouble staying on track, not drifting off. In most of the formal executive function testing, it's been hard to discern that people with ADHD really have trouble sustaining attention. That may be that our tests aren't measuring it in the best way or most real-life accurate way, be that as may. So vigilance, sustained attention is one potential area ADHD could contribute to car crashes. Number 2 is problems with a different aspect of attention, and that's sort of the arousal alertness, and specifically how well you respond to external cues. So car pulls out in front of you, someone slams on their brakes, someone changes lanes, things like that. If you weren't responding to those quickly or with sufficient time, that could contribute to an accident. And there is more solid data that people with ADHD do have delayed responses to external cues or problems with that form of arousal alertness. 3rd category where ADHD executive function deficits could contribute to car accidents is impairment in what's called top-down attentional control, or endogenous orienting. So endogenous is internal. So can you impose and decide on yourself, yes, I will stay on track and watch traffic, rather than, again, being distracted with the radio or with my person in the back seat is talking about, or kids fighting, or X, Y, or Z. So endogenous orienting, distractibility is related to this concept. Could be impaired, and many studies do show impairment in this factor in ADHD, and that could be contributing to car accidents. And then the 4th area is the impulsivity and problems with inhibitory control, that if you aren't thinking about the ramifications, if you just decide, oh, I need to get over there, I'll switch lanes without looking. That form of poor inhibitory control, poor impulse control, could lead to accidents as well. And all of these have been proposed by different authors. So 2020, there was a good study, rigorously done study, looking at these different factors. What this study looked at, it was a study comprised of 3,600 drivers at 6 locations across the U.S. There were 275 of them who met full criteria for ADHD. Those drivers were given subjective self-assessment tests. They were given neuropsychological testing to look at different aspects of these 4 different inhibitory control: impairment in top-down attention, arousal alertness, sustained attention. And then the cars had monitoring devices that were on them for about a year or 2. So these were devices monitoring the vehicle, so acceleration, other speed, other aspects of what the car was doing. And during this time, these subjects had 1,549 crashes and about 2,700 near crashes. So there's plenty of data to be crunched and looked at. An important thing to mention is that this study was not looking at the time of the accident as to what the individual was doing. So what we were looking at were ADHD traits, I would say. So at the baseline, if someone had problems with arousal, vigilance, and impulse control, others, those were rated and measured, and those were looked at as to whether they were a predictor of accidents. But we weren't, in this study, they weren't looking at the moment someone crashed, or in the minutes, seconds before a crash. They weren't looking at whether that driver was lost attention or were distracted or were being impulsive. Those kinds of studies could be done. They'd be considerably more expensive, but with growing technological advances, that could be done. So again, these were more looking at ADHD traits as a predictor for future crashes, severe crashes. And very strongly and robustly, what came out is that impairment of top-down attentional control, that endogenous orienting, that being able to decide, I'm going to focus on this and stay attentive to this, was the strongest predictor for crashes, near misses, all the problematic issues with driving that this study was looking at. About the only other correlation came out was that arousal or alertness, sorry for the phone interruption, I can't do anything about that right now. Problems with arousal or alertness or responding to cues was correlated with near car crashes, but not with crashes themselves. So that's the information from the finding. So it would suggest strong attention to strengthening endogenous orienting, strengthening that top-down control over attention should be the most helpful intervention for helping with car crashes. Again, what we don't know and what's potentially interesting, it's not just car crashes that are a source of excess mortality in ADHD. And again, as in previous talks I've mentioned, the impact of ADHD on shortening lifespan is as profound as the impact of depression, as diabetes, as schizophrenia. All those cut about 10 years off of someone's lifespan. ADHD, it's the same, and with ADHD, it's clearly attributable to an excess of accidents and suicides are the two, almost all the excess deaths seem attributable to those two. So getting back to what can we do about this? One is we do have a number of studies showing that for people with ADHD who take their stimulant medications or other medications that help specifically with aspects of ADHD, their driving improves. So you are a safer driver driving on your Vyvanse or Adderall or Concerta if it's well regulated in the pup and in an appropriate dosage range for you, your driving is far better than if you are not taking that. Two, a common recommendation is doing everything you can to be consciously engaged in the driving. So I've seen articles that recommend turning off cruise control. I've seen articles that recommended driving a stick shift. Now, that might be good advice. The data I looked at showed that most recent year, only 2.4% of cars being sold in America, and I think it was 2020, one recent year, less than 3% of cars are stick shift cars. So giving the advice people with ADHD should drive a stick shift may be useful advice at an intellectual level, but it's not particularly practical advice. Even more crucially, and about a decade ago, as cell phones became more popular, there was a spate of laws passed in different states forbidding handheld devices or use of handheld devices in the car. And as far as I'm aware, every one of these laws almost completely missed the point, that it's what you're doing with your brain. It's not what you're doing with your hands. Yes, if your hands are engaged in a task separate from driving, that's going to make your brain engaged. But even if you have a handless device and are listening to phone calls coming in or talking to people, your brain is distracted. And with ADHD, your driving is going to be even more impaired on average than someone without ADHD by a distraction like that. Third factor, and I think an important one to mention in this context for pretty much everyone, alcohol is not their friend, and alcohol reduces reaction time, makes coordination worse. And yes, different states have different limits where someone's clearly, obviously impaired, but this is not a step function. This is a continuous variable. So even small amounts of alcohol are impairing all of this somewhat. And the particular interaction of note that's sad and important to be aware of with ADHD is that measurably people with ADHD alcohol itself impairs our ability to know how impaired by alcohol we are. I mean, I don't think most drunk drivers are sociopaths. Most of them think, I've had a few, but I can drive okay. Alcohol itself impairs our ability to monitor how impaired we are. But ADHD and alcohol impairs ability to monitor yourself even more so. So your assessment that you can drive okay is not likely to be accurate. So one other step is there are driving classes for people with ADHD in particular to help them become more oriented to the ways their ADHD may contribute to more accidents, and particularly, again, those classes that focus on strengthening the ability to impose your control over your own focus and attention are likely to be particularly helpful. One study a few years ago suggested, and this was mostly focused on medication and ADHD and driving, that somewhere between 40 and 50% of ADHD-involved traffic accidents could be avoided with proper medication. Proper medication and behavioral training would hopefully have an even bigger impact. So again, this study suggested, at least in the realm of driving, that it was particularly that distractibility, that impaired top-down ability to control attention and direct it on what's important, was the most important deficit in contributing to car accidents. We don't know whether that's what's most crucial in a much more heterogeneous realm of other accidents or problems with ADHD, but it's, I'd say, suggestive that that may be where to look. Next week is going to be my number 100th video talk here. The topic is going to be not ADD narrowed, but for anyone who has a brain, my quest, not test approach to living. So that's all. I'm not seeing any questions coming in, so have a good, healthy, happy week.